Welcome back to Our Rugby Club. If you joined us for the first episode in this two-parter, you'll know we were talking with former Scotland international fullback Ian Smith, now in his 80s, and remarkably a TikTok sensation with 1.4 million followers. In the second half of this conversation, Ian turns his attention to the modern game. From the elite level right down to community rugby, he shares some strong views on what he thinks needs to change. Some of his ideas are a little bit left field, maybe even controversial, but they're certainly thought-provoking, and I agree with many of them. So, throw the kit bag in the corner, grab yourself a seat, get yourself a beer or a coffee, and enjoy the conversation. I'm trying to understand why you think leagues have killed it and not the fact that there's football, cricket, schools not promoting rugby, those sort of things. I'm just trying to understand where you put the basis of the leagues.
If let's suppose you and I play against each other and we're in whatever level, I get confused, but we're in the same, we're no longer at the same level. You've gone up a league, we've gone down a league. Now, instead of the situation when I was a kid where you went on playing against the same people, because we had a league in Scotland, but it was unofficial. These are official leagues. And so we're down in this league, and I don't know anybody in any side because there are teams that have come up into that league. We've gone down into that league. And I took West Norfolk to, I'm not going to mention the club, but if anybody's watching this and they're a player there, they'll know exactly who I'm talking about. And this club in northeast London is surrounded by houses, all right? We did not know one single player in their team. Because there were houses all round, the pitch was covered in dog poo. And we couldn't get out of there fast enough at the end. And I know the next time that they wanted to raise a side to go down there, they had difficulty raising that team to do that. Now, that's the principal reason that I don't think leagues work, because people like to play against people they know, because they're not playing. Read Michael Green, The Art of Course Rugby, or even Courser Rugby. You know, have you read The Art of Course Rugby?
No, I don't believe I have. No.
You need to
Put it on
get
my list.
you need to get a copy of it because
I'll put it in the link below so people can.
it's got wonderful stories in it. My favorite story is the scrum half who was penalised by the referee for putting the ball in squint, and he called the referee a blind bastard. And the referee, and he looked over his shoulder and started running, pursued by the referee, who eventually caught up with him. And the referee said to him, "What did you say to me?" Then he smiled and said, "Deaf as well." And I mean, that's at least a yellow. But you see, and to me, that's one of the reasons that leagues don't work. The other reason, of course, is that rugby clubs now have coaches. And if you play for the club seconds, the first, no choice, but if you play for the seconds, the coach wants you at training Tuesday and Thursday. But I don't want to train. You know, I just want to play rugby on a Saturday and have a few pints and a chat, and I'm going to see Fred and John I haven't seen for ages. And we've lost that. It's gone.
That was something I was thinking while you were talking about leagues. And there's all these levels as well, isn't there, in terms of clubs? Every team's at a certain level 8, level 9, level 7, level 12, level 14, and level 15. And, you know, and it does get all a little bit too much from my perspective anyway, as somebody that loved playing rugby and didn't give a shit what league I was in. If I'm honest, didn't really care which team I was in. I liked having a good old shower afterwards when it's freezing cold standing on the wing, because it warmed me up after the game and I was looking forward to my pint of Guinness. I think a lot of that has gone. And just to give it an example, and I won't mention the club as you didn't earlier, but there was a club that has pulled out of the league that they're in currently because the RFU indicated that they would like them to be up in a league, a higher league, and they said, okay, we'll give it a go. But as soon as they agreed to do so, they struggled to find players. And eventually they decided that they would opt out of that particular league. And then 6 players came back immediately because it was back to being a social side. And I do wonder, with what you said about, having to do all the training and all the various levels of leagues, as to whether or not that participant of the game that could be interested has walked away.
Yes, I don't think there's any doubt at all. We're not going to talk about sort of the top levels, but I was at
No,
the.
we can touch on, as long as we don't talk about the specifics of why England lost or,
No, 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 no. I'm glad. Um, I'm a Scotsman. Never forget that. I don't care who
All right,
wins.
okay, don't
I
rub
don't
it
care
in.
who
Okay.
wins as long as it's not England. And
I haven't
anyway,
even watched the bloody game because I was so disappointed with even thinking about watching it.
I was down at London Scottish last weekend, and one of the things that struck me were the number of lads on the touchline who should be playing, and the 4 or 5 empty pitches. There was shinty going on one of them. Pitches that were occupied when I played at London Scottish, and all these young men. And I go up to West Norfolk, and I mean, there's people I coached who are now getting it to the vet stage, but they should still be playing on a Saturday afternoon. And so you've got to ask questions, and you've got to say why. And there's not just obviously one reason. People talk about competition from other sports, and I think the leagues are one reason for it, and the other reasons are the demands on training, because coaches want you to train, and I understand that as well. But in our day, I don't know how old you are, but I mean, I'm 81 now. So I belong to a totally lost generation. Um, but we looked for space. We were coached by our rugby masters at school, which is there were no minis. They hadn't Nobody had even thought about them. All the rugby was taught to you at school, and we were taught to run into space. I mean, if you consider, do you know how they decided what position you would play in at school when I was a boy? They played British Bulldogs.
I remember that game.
And if you were quick and you were still alive at the end, that was it. You were going to be in the backs. And, and then we would play murder ball in the gym. Do you remember murder ball? There's a mat at either end of the gym and a medicine ball put down in the middle, and one team behind the mat here, the other team behind the mat there. Then you'd rush to pick up the medicine ball, and if you could get it onto the mat at the enemy's end, that was a goal.
Oh, I don't think I ever played that one.
Well, that's how you became a forward. If the
Okay, you muscle your way. Yeah. So we were talking about rugby clubs. Um, I do wonder what the goal is of the RFU, the powers that be, for the game of rugby. We've seen lots of initiatives, lots of focus groups, lots of suggestions. The women's game seems to be flourishing, which is amazing.
Somebody told me that the RFU are withdrawing their money to the women's game.
Yes, that's allegedly something that is happening. So a lot of clubs I've heard that were trying to promote the women's game and now not going to have the money, and they're already pulling back from those local initiatives. So that's not going to work long term. Although the RFU have just published their Focus 2030, which apparently is their vision for the future. I'm not sure if that will work. They've also talked about recruiting lots of new referees. They've talked about getting back into schools. They've talked and talked and talked about lots of different things, Ian. If you were the governing body, or do we really need a governing body? You know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? Do we really need a governing body to tell us how to fix community rugby?
Well, I just think people should be able to play rugby without all these bloody people interfering. I mean, for example, how on earth you're a referee? Why don't we just say that we accept the fact that the rugby that we watch on television, which is no longer controlled by the referee? I was brought up to believe that you, as a referee, were the sole judge of fact on the pitch. That's long gone. Because when I watch a match on television and a try is scored, if you listen very closely, you'll hear a little voice saying, "You may award the try." And that's the TMO. And when you go and watch a match where there is no TMO, like in the championship, it's fantastic. You know, it starts at 2:30 and it finishes 80 minutes and 10 minutes half time later, and you know it's going to finish then. But goodness only knows how long an international match is going to take. A match at community level, you know when it's going to finish, and I think that's actually, I think that's rather nice. And I
But the
think
ball in play in international and championship and premiership is it's like 50% of the clock. It
I mean,
doesn't make sense.
I personally think instead of having the adverts when they're about to set a scrum, and David Flatman, oh, I remember watching David as a boy, and that was formidable. Dulwich had a front row, one British Lion, one English international prop, and a guy who played for Bedford at hooker. So they had a lot of uncontested scrums. There's another argument point. But in my opinion, they could well put the TV adverts on when the ball's kicked in the air by the scrum half. I mean, it's in the air long enough. Um, I don't know. Do you think they're going to ration it? Say you can only do three and a half. That would be a good one.
Well, I would, and I'd get rid of that crocodile off the back of rucks and
But
stuff. I'd get
if
rid of
you
that.
were not talking about this level of rugby, but if you brought the mark back and you stopped jumping and you stopped people running and sticking their hand up in the air and shouting mark,
But that's not in the law, Ian. It's not the law to stick your blingy hand up in
I
the thing.
know.
It's just, and then you get it on the rugby pitch in the community level. This is what's so frustrating about the international game, because they assume that what they see on the pitch is what you do at community rugby. It's not what we do.
So look, why don't we accept the fact that the rugby that's played by the gods of the game is a different game of rugby? Look, do you know the history of rugby league?
Broadly, but it's separated, isn't it? It's separated away from
Do you know
union.
why?
No.
It was an issue called broken time,
Okay.
and that players had to have time off work because they worked, I think, a 6-day week, and they lost wages because they were paid hourly.
Okay.
And so clubs paid them to play the time that was broken when they weren't working in the late part of the 19th century. And that's why rugby league began. Don't you think the time has come to split the game that's played with TMOs away from the game of rugby that you referee and that most people play? Let's not lose sight of the fact that 90% of the rugby that is played in this country is played without a TMO. So let's let them have their own.
Well, probably 90% have played without ARs, assistant referees that we
Yes.
see.
Do you mean
You know,
touch
it's the
judges?
local bloke with the flag sticking up that doesn't really know what he's doing. And that's
Yes.
fine.
But I mean, so
But where do you
Right.
cut it then? This is the thing, Ian. Where do you suddenly say, okay, we'll stop it at level 5, level 6,
No,
level
you
7? I mean,
nobody
how do
is
you?
allowed to be paid below the level where a TMO is involved.
Okay.
And let's go back. Okay, when I played, there was a great forward called Peter Eastwood, Royal Army Pay Corps, and Peter should have played for England, but he wasn't an officer. I mean, I'm being absolutely serious. The best scrum half in England was in the Remy. His name was David Spawforth. I played with him for the Army. And David should have played for England,
You didn't have a horse.
but he wasn't an officer.
Uh, okay.
And, it. Um, I mean, there's interesting thoughts, and I'm going to put a thought to you now, and you
Go
can
on then.
laugh at me, but it's going to happen. All right.
Go on.
In I think about 1911, American football, which was directly related to rugby, was dying,
Yeah.
and it was dying because people were dying.
Okay. Explain.
Um, well, you look at the ferocity of the challenges in American football. Why do they wear crash hats? You remember the movie that came out, which was the first real attention that was drawn to the brain damage that was being done to American footballers, which was then picked up in this country. Now, somebody said, why don't we introduce the forward pass? And the purists said, you'll kill the game. And it had exactly the opposite effect. And I think one of the great sporting sights is to see the quarterback, who's the scrum half, throwing a ball, which is a different, same shape but different size, throwing a ball 70 yards to a man who's running with a guy trying to interfere with him, and he's still catching the ball. I mean, there's not much playtime in American football, but that moment in time is, I think, one of the most astonishing. It saved it saved rugby in America, American football. Now, I'm not suggesting our rugby needs saved, but you know, if you go to an international and you sit there, and I went to a Scotland Ireland match 2 seasons ago or last season, we were in the corner, quite close to an aisle, and at any moment in time, there are 10 people in that aisle carrying beer. And I don't know how many aisles there are at Murrayfield, but let's say there are 50. Now, the game came into our corner and it was very exciting. And it looked as if there was going to be a try. A lot of noise from the crowd. Not one of these 10 people turned round. Not one.
Oh
They just
wow.
carried on with their beer, which they needed to go back to empty a little bit later. And my point is that people who go to international rugby matches now go to be entertained. They don't know anything about rugby. They go so they can say on Monday when they're in the office, I was there. They don't know what they were there at because they don't know the laws of the game. And people who want to go to international matches can't afford to now because it's too bloody
No.
expensive.
True. That's why I don't go. And also, was it you? I can't remember if it was you on one of your TikToks. And by the way, everybody, Ian is a prolific TikToker. He's got 2 TikToks. I'm blown away by the fact 1.4 million followers on one of his TikToks.
Writers.cramp.
Writers. I'll put it in the link below. And we got another one about rugby, 1.4 million followers. And I don't know if it was you that made this comment that the players actually don't give a monkey's toss about the crowd being there at all. All they're to entertain you. They're not there to entertain you. All they're going to do is win. That's all they're interested in. Was it you who said that?
Yeah, it was. I mean, I
Yeah,
think
thought
the
it was.
atmosphere is fantastic, but just because kind of coming a full circle here.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I like that. See what we've done.
we're, we are we're talking about a little boy called Ian Smith who went to Murrayfield in 1951 when Wales came back from the Lions in New Zealand in 1950, and with a host of them were Welshmen. They came up to Scotland. We were fairly poor. It was the last international we won for 4 years. They were expected to beat us, and we beat them 19-0. And I sat in the school enclosure seats at Murrayfield all around the ground. Every school had seats allocated, and they were sold, excuse me, by the games masters at school. So we got our love of the game from that. But little kids are priced out of it now. You can't take your child. You don't get special rates for a child, do you? You have to pay the full whack. And you don't, I mean, I think we paid £140 a ticket to go to Murrayfield on Saturday to watch the French match. And by the way, I get tickets as an ex-player, but I still pay the same price. We can have a mono. We're not talking about international rugby, but what I am talking about is the death of the game at the community level, because the kids don't get to go to see their heroes. So what could we do about that? To me, that's a terribly important thing. If we want the game to go on and survive, if we got rid of the leagues, you see, the RFU have a stranglehold because they determine when you're going to kick off.
Yeah.
So you have whatever league you're in. I mean, West Norfolk went down to play Cantabs, I think 2 seasons ago, and they lost something like 92-6. That was our firsts. And I think they had to haul somebody in off the touchline who was 50 years old who didn't play rugby to make up the numbers. Now, I might be wrong there, but it was something like that. Now, a few weeks later, Cantabs came up to West Norfolk. Who won? West Norfolk. Why? The reason was it was the big last international Saturday. So there were 3 internationals going on that day. And guess what? The Cantabs players wanted to watch the rugby.
Yeah.
They couldn't raise a side.
Yeah.
Now, none of that would have mattered if they'd been allowed to move the kickoff to 10:30 in the morning. Why do they have to kick off at 3 o'clock in the afternoon when there's an international on?
I don't think they do. I've just got something else jumping around in my head. I've got to ask you this question. We talked about the elite game and maybe almost separating it out. I get that. But how do we get, where's the join? There's got to be a join between community rugby and the elite game, because otherwise the elite game won't have feeders. So there's got to be a way that people jump from the community game. So are you saying we don't have any leagues in the community game at all because we don't have TMOs and all these things, and it's a good social game, but then the bigger clubs, the elite clubs, maybe are going to send out their scouts, are they? Are they going to send scouts out to the community game and say, oh, he's a good little player, maybe we should bring him in? But then you lose them from the elite game, from the community game.
I mean, somebody said to me when I went down to Scottish last weekend that actually you're looking at Harlequin's second 15. Because if a player who plays for London Scottish is good, and you don't have to be a Scotsman to play for London Scottish.
No.
Now, ask yourself a question. I don't like the RFU, and I don't like the way they operate. I'm a Will Carling fan, really. And isn't it really odd that London Welsh, London Scottish, and London Irish, who you had to be of that nationality to play for.
Yeah. Back in the day.
But actually, I played for London Irish, and I'm not an Irishman, but I did play under a pseudonym. But the all these clubs used to exist, but I mean, London Welsh produced I don't know how many Lions in the 71 Lions side. They were the backbone of the Welsh side. JPR Williams, John Dawes, Gerald Davis. I just wonder And London Scottish, you may or may not remember, I think they got kicked about 6 levels down because of some question over something or other, maybe the ground, or because they shared a ground with Richmond. I'm not sure why, but they were destroyed. But Saracens, who quite deliberately broke the financial regulations, were only sent down one league because they were a club full of internationalists and they were English.
Well, look, there's another huge subject that we can talk about another time, I'm sure, when professionalism, if you like, or paying players came into the game. I never got paid, by the way, I wasn't good enough, but I remember that our local club, Moseley,
Yeah.
um, went out of business. There was fraud going on there.
And that was Sam Doble and Nigel Horton. Was it Nigel Horton,
Yeah,
second
I
of?
think you're right.
Yeah.
And I used to go up the Readings and watch them, and we actually beat them, my local club, in a cup game. There you go. Just like to say that out loud. Old Dixonians, the oldest club in English rugby. Check it out. It was uh, in a program one time at Twickenham, and I thought, oh, really? Are we? And we played Moseley, but then money came into it, and now every weekend I was talking to another club, and they're struggling to get some players out, and I said, why is that? And the comment was made about another club that's paying their players, have been poaching people across, and you can understand why. And yeah, all these things. It's money, 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 money. It just makes me wonder whether or not the professionalism of the game and the money side of the game, and you've mentioned the leagues and the administration side of it, is it all? It's just too much, isn't it, Ian? It's just all too
Yeah.
much for what we love.
Yes, I agree entirely. I mean, I would.
Your final thought of the day, then. Come on, give me your final thought based on my rant.
We have to find. We have to find a way of stopping mothers being frightened when they watch rugby on television.
Okay.
Because, if I were there's one particular English back row forward whose name I will not mention. I'm a huge fan at his efforts, but all he does is run into people at huge speed.
Yeah.
And you and I both know that when he's in his 40s, he's going to have some memory problems because of the collisions.
Yes,
Because,
MND and those things have been
yeah,
talked
because
about
these are
constantly
like
now.
motor car accidents. Now, I had a son who was a decent rugby player, was concussed a couple of times and stopped playing rugby and went and played hockey. And I was glad. Now, if somebody who's as steeped in rugby as I have been all my life is glad when a son, and his mother just did not want him to play. And I mean, she loves her rugby. I have a daughter who's very knowledgeable about the game, and Julie's knowledgeable about the game, but she, like me, doesn't like what she sees. Rugby has lost the wonderful things that it used to have. I played once um, for bosuns against public school wanderers to raise money for somebody who'd been injured or something. And there must have been 14 or 15 current internationals on the pitch and several other players who were to get capped. People giving of their time to play in a fun match, but a serious game of rugby. And that was what rugby was all about. It's lost that, and we'll never get it back. It's gone. It's gone forever. You would play co-optimists in Scotland were kind of the Scottish barbarians. They had a wonderful custom that the player who was the most played for the co-optimists was captain of the side. And you could have the captain of Scotland playing, but if you'd played for the co-ops more often than never been captain, and you got a special tie. The co-optimist tie was a sort of blue background with a white, like a sphinx on it, and you got a white circle around that if you'd ever been captain of the co-optimists. And I was lucky enough once to be captain when there were people far more senior than I was playing. And these things have gone. Rugby has gone. Rugby's now focused on little places. Why don't we have the top 64 teams in the country playing in an FA Cup tournament like it, ending at the end of the season at Twickenham, and not this silly business where you have to get into the top four to get into a semi-final, to get into a final, just so you can swell the coffers at Twickenham with people who don't know anything about rugby but want to be there to say that they were there. I mean, imagine Harlequins going down to Redruth in the first round of the Cup on a muddy
Yeah.
day on that pitch with a dip into the corner where Redruth used to get you down there and keep you down there. And people say, but these Redruth players will get injured playing against the Harlequins players. Well, I don't think Harlequins would put their stars out on the pitch. They'd have them on the bench. And if things weren't going well, they'd bring them on. But the point being that Redruth would get to see the Marcus Smiths of this world, or if it was Saracens, they'd get to see the Owen Farrells of this world and the Atogis of this world, and we would spread the game that way.
Ian, I love that. I absolutely love that, because that's the first time I've heard anybody talk in that way about like a League Cup or an FA Cup of rugby. And I think that would inspire people at local clubs, knowing that Harlequins, if you like, or Saracens are going to turn up at their local club to play a level 5 sort of side, or a level 6, maybe even side. Who knows what level it is? But because we all love those the killers, don't we? The people that topple the big boy,
Yeah.
because they might just lose on that day when it's all muddy and
When
they
I
don't
was a
send
little
their best
boy,
players.
when I was a little boy, Heriots had I don't know, their 50th anniversary of the club forming, and Harlequins came up from London to play. This wonderful, these gods of rugby came to Golden Acre, and in these wonderful shirts that they used to wear, woolly too, they were, and it was incredible. I've never forgotten it, and you could never think, one day I'm going to play against these guys, but you had a dream, Imagine playing against Harlequins, and it happened. I mean, I played against them several times, but just to see these gods of rugby in Edinburgh. Um, I've never forgotten that. In the same way that a little boy down in Redruth, or I don't know, somewhere else in Norwich, although they don't play in a high enough league anymore, but that kind of thing, the excitement that would bring would be fantastic.
Ian, it's been amazing. Thanks for your time
Oh,
today.
I'm sorry, I've
And
slightly left of field opinions, I realise.
well, we like that. We like that. And to everybody listening, thank you for listening to our Rugby Club podcast.
As long as it's been useful, and perhaps we'll talk again sometime.
I bloody well hope so, mate.
Nice to meet you.
Cheers.
Bye bye now.
Well, that just about brings us to the end of this episode of Our Rugby Club, conversation with Ian Smith. Across these 2 episodes, we've travelled through rugby history, from the way the game was played in Ian's heyday, which is fascinating, right the way through to his thoughts on where the game might be heading, or should be heading, next. Ian's been around rugby for a very long time, and whether or not you agree with everything he says, there's no doubt his perspective is fascinating, especially from somebody now in his 80s who also managed to build a TikTok following of more than 1.4 million. There's a link below. So, Ian, thanks for sharing your stories, your memories, and your thoughts on the game we all love. And listener, if you've enjoyed this episode, or the first one, please do like, subscribe, and share with the rugby community around you. That might be the club that you play for, the club that you support, or the volunteers who keep the whole thing going every weekend. Because at the end of the day, rugby is all about community. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. at Our Rugby Club.